appreciate that. I told the artists they got to stay on seat. Oh, really? We encapsulated it real well. I appreciate it. Now, I wanted to.
Yes. Yeah, and I'm just putting my stuff down.
Perfect. Okay, great.
I appreciate your. Coffee and bagels works. That Jack Daniels works too. Air Force guy's pretty easy on you. You're getting worse than Fulner on timing. Good morning. Welcome to the Heritage Foundation and our Lewis Lehrman Auditorium. We, of course, welcome those who join us on our heritage.org website on all of these occasions. Would ask our guests here in-house if you'll be so kind to make a courtesy check that our mobile devices have been silenced or turned off. And for those watching online now or in the future, you're welcome to send questions or comments at any time, simply emailing speaker@heritage.org. And of course, we will post today's program on our Heritage homepage for everyone's future reference. Leading our discussion and welcoming our special guest is Thomas Spohr. He is director of our Center for National Defense in the Catherine and Shelby Cullom Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy. Let's see, it's taken me 18 years to finally mess that up. I said it, that's right. Before joining Heritage last year, he served for over 36 years in the U.S. Army, where he attained the rank of Lieutenant General. His most recent postings included Director of the Army Office of Business Transformation at the Office of the Undersecretary of the Army, Director of Program Evaluation and Analysis at the headquarters of the Department of the Army, and he also was a Deputy Commanding General for Support in the United States Forces for Iraq. Please join me in welcoming General Spohr.
Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this important event. And the title of it is A Looming National Security Crisis. And I don't think that's an overstatement, as we'll hear from our keynote speaker and our panel today. Today's forum is co-sponsored by the Heritage Foundation and Mission Readiness. Mission Readiness, an organization of more than 700 retired admirals, generals, senior military officers who recognize that the strength of our country depends on a strong military. Their acting national director is Ms. Jamie Lockhart. Jamie's here today joining us. Thank you, Jamie. Mission Readiness is part of the Council for a Strong America, a national bipartisan nonprofit uniting 5 organizations who promote solutions that ensure our next generation of Americans will be citizen ready. And I want to recognize and thank the President of Council for a Strong America, Mr. David Cass, who also joins us this morning. David, thank you so much, sir. Well, much is written and spoken about military readiness, training, maintenance, modernization. These all topics have considerable attention, especially this week with the Association of the United States Army's conference, and especially in these times of increased world tension. Yet, often overlooked in all these discussions that typically revolve around money and systems is the single most important ingredient to readiness, and that is the man or the woman that makes it all possible, the sailor, the soldier, the Marine, or the airman. General Creighton Abrams said it best when he said, "Soldiers are not in the Army, soldiers are the Army." And the same applies to all the other military services. Our military depends on a constant flow of qualified volunteers willing to serve, and as we will discuss today, the ability to depend on that flow is in question. Kicking off our event and providing keynote remarks, we are lucky to have a leader who sees this issue from many sides, an elected representative, a former senior leader in the military, and as a father and a grandfather. Congressman Don Bacon was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives to represent Nebraska's 2nd District, in 2016. Prior to his election, he was a career Air Force officer, serving nearly 30 years, ultimately retiring in 2014 as a brigadier general. Congressman Bacon grew up and worked on a farm in Illinois, learning firsthand the value of hard work and commitment. During his career in the Air Force, Congressman Bacon specialized in electronic warfare, intelligence, reconnaissance, and public affairs. Congressman Bacon served 16 assignments, including 4 deployments across the globe, 3 of which in the Middle East, and 1 assignment to Iraq from 2007 to 2008 during Operation Iraqi Freedom. Congressman Bacon has earned 2 master's degrees from the University of Phoenix in Arizona and the National War College in Washington, D.C. Presently, Congressman Bacon serves on 3 committees within the House: the House Armed Services Committee, the House Small Business Committee, and the House Agricultural Committee. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Bacon.
Knowing I was going to be here today, I've got my Air Force tie on, Air Force cufflinks. Hopefully I don't offend our Army brothers and sisters here. But what an honor to be here. And I appreciate our mission readiness. I was driving in a car campaigning one day, got a call from mission readiness saying, "Hey, you're not a part of our team yet." I go, "Who are you?" "Well, we're worried about the health of our youth, and why is it that so many can't join the military anymore?" I said, "Okay, sign me up. You got me." I was an easy sell. And I really appreciate being here at Heritage. What an honor to have this in the backdrop, the Heritage up front. My father was a Goldwater volunteer, and he would subscribe to Human Events, which we don't hear much about them anymore, but it was a conservative newspaper. So I was reading that since I was like 10 years old. National Review since I was like 13. My 8th grade teacher asked the class one day, can anybody name a Supreme Court justice? I knew all 9 and how they voted. I knew all 100 senators and what states they were from. I was a geek. And so I knew about the Heritage since I was a young teenager. And so to be here is an honor. And I appreciate the comments and the introduction. Clearly, the soldier, the Marine, the sailor, the airman are what the military is built around. It's not the plane, it's not the ship, it's not the tank. And if we have physical problems or mental issues or whatever it may be, it affects the strength of our country. And today, the main theme we're going to hear is that 71% of our youth cannot qualify to enter the services. That's an appalling number, 71%. So I think for those who are listening today, if you have a key takeaway, that's it. We got to do better. 71% is a red flag for our country. And we could recruit out of that 29%, but it's challenging, I think. I mean, I work on the Armed Services Committee and I just heard the other day from the Army some of the challenges of recruiting at the level they need to recruit, which has led to some secondary issues, which we won't go into here. We'll pick on the Army on that. But it presents challenges to meet those numbers. And what happens if we hit a national emergency where we have to go beyond that initial great group of young men and women who want to volunteer, and we got to dig deeper. And you can't find folks who can carry that 50-pound rucksack in 120-degree heat. So I'm concerned about a reserve strength when you have that kind of number out there. So one of the key takeaways for me is 71% cannot qualify. That's for a variety of reasons. We know most of it's physical conditioning. We also know some of it's the level of education or maybe a criminal record of some type. Or we see an increase in antidepressant use for mental health reasons there. You put it all together, you get that number, but the majority of it is physical conditioning out there. So I'd like to just share a little bit of my story. You know, I joined in 1985, and I would say on a 1 to 10 basis, physical shape, when I was at officer training school, I was a 90-day wonder. I led my entire class in demerits, by the way, out of 250. 4 of us ended up making general, so there is hope if you're not doing well in school. You can overcome it. But I would say that I got over a 90 on my PT score. So it was an A, they called it, at the officer training school. I wasn't 100, but I was in the low 90s, which gave me the excellent category. I remember when I got out as a second lieutenant and I go to Lowry and then I go to Offutt Air Force Base as a lieutenant. I'll be darned, and I'm trying to clean up my language in here because I know we're on TV, so I use darned specifically. If I was going to let a colonel or a general or a chief master sergeant beat me in the 1.5 mile run, that's the way I would have ripped my heart out in my lungs if I had to whatever it took to win. I think I was going to let no 50-year-old guy beat a 22-year-old or 21-year-old on that mile-and-a-half run. And I was like that I was at that the day I retired. I was going to try to be the first in every run I had. Wasn't always the first, but I would just say it's not like that anymore. I ended up commanding 5 times. And I commanded 8,000, I commanded 7,000. I would always go out with units on their mile-and-a-half run for the Air Force PT test. And I would finish in the top 1 or 2% as a 50-year-old against those 28, some of them times 18-year-olds. And I always said, man, what was with you guys? I would have never have let me beat me. That makes sense. You know, I would have hit me in the kneecap or something, done something. I would have done anything I could to not let that old guy beat me. And but it's changed in that regard. And I saw just over 30 years, that culture of what we were bringing in slowly changed, and not for the better. So what happened? Well, from my perspective, if you just touch your own lives, I think most of us older guys here will attest to this. When I grew up, I had 3 main TV channels and WGN. 4 channels. And every once in a while I get the UHF thing too, and you get that educational programming, but I never watched it anyway because it was educational. And but there was 3 TV channels and WGN, so 4 channels. And during the afternoon, what did they play? Every Day As Your Stomach Turns, or I can't remember what were the titles of those soaps? I don't remember. But you know, Guiding Blight or something like that. I don't know. The days of our boring lives. I don't know. I couldn't figure out why would you want to watch that for, because it never ended. I'd like to see an ending, a positive ending or some kind of ending. And my grandmother watched those soaps every day. It's, Grandma, you got to watch it again tomorrow? Yeah, because something new is going to happen. And it went on for years. I said, well, what's good of watching this thing? But that's what we had. Soap operas every day at afternoon. So what do? You played outside. I played baseball, football. We had a pond nearby, swam. My dad gave me about 10 different chores. So I was in charge of cleaning out the pens. We had horses. We had my grandparents had cattle. And I had to feed them. But one of the worst jobs was cleaning out the pens. And I learned a valuable lesson by that. You know, it's better to clean out the pens every week than let it stack up for a month. Makes me very qualified to work in Washington right now. It's much easier to clean those pens when you do it on a regular basis. Just a valuable lesson in case you're in one of these situations. But it keeps you in shape. So we worked out every day. You're outside playing or you're working. And then at the age of 13, I was given a job on the farm, started getting paid for $1.50 an hour. So I baled hay, 4 times a year. You're out shoveling grain. And if there was nothing to do on the farm, you walked the soybean fields with a hoe and you cut out the corn. That's when you had nothing else to do. And you could do 5-10 miles a day walking the cornfields or the soybean fields, doing that. Point is, you were in shape. And today our youth don't have that to that degree anymore. So 4 TV channels. Today I was looking at my TV last night. I have about 200. I still can't find anything sometimes that I want to watch. I don't know why that is. But also, let's think about the video games. So I had one game. We got the first video game in 1973, an Atari game, Pong. Anybody else play that Pong game that's older? And after a month, it gets a little boring, don't it? Yes, because that's all we had. You had to pick this box about this big, you hook it into your TV, and the Pong would go back and forth. Today, you got thousands of those games. In fact, I don't understand them. If you hit an orange with your head, you get points. Can't figure it out. Some of the arcade games that my grandkids, I have 4 kids, my younger ones are playing. But thousands of games. So here's the second data point I'd like you to remember. So the first one is 71%. Can't qualify in the military. I was looking at stats yesterday in preparation for this. The average teen, particularly in the summer months, does 7 hours of video games a day. Does that not explain why we have a problem? I think it says it right there. When it comes to physical shape, 7 hours a day, if you do that 7 days a week, that's more than a full-time job. Yeah, you're getting overtime. And to me, right there explains the core of the issue. And how do you change that? It's a cultural change. And culture, is those in the military know, it's very hard to change a culture. But it starts with us. It starts with our own families. It starts with our schools as well. But it's going to take a lot of work. It's not going to be easy to turn around a ship where the average family is doing 7 hours of video games a day. So anyway, I think that's the main focus that I wanted to look at on the physical side. I think we have to also acknowledge that we have about 1 in 5 of our youth today will struggle to get in as well because of the expanded use of antidepressants. 1 in 5 get various types of mental health care. And I think that's, how do you assess that? I would say in some ways it's good because we're more attuned to mental health today, and we didn't know to be attuned to it. And I think we need mental health parity. It's part of our overall health. But the fact is that we should understand that there are impacts there, and we have to put more emphasis on that. And Congress has been working on that as well to fund it right and ensure that we include that as part of our overall health thing. Here's another area that concerns me. And it's a little different than what mission readiness focuses on. But I think for those who serve, and the fact that we know that when you come in, you say the oath to the Constitution, many of our youth today don't know the Constitution. What are they saying the oath to? And that is part of our civic leadership. It's part of our civic, what should help inspire us to do more and help us want to serve. When you swear that oath to support and defend the Constitution, what does that mean? And if you look at the stats, it's not pretty. I pulled out just a few yesterday, or this past week. 10% of our youth think Judge Judy's a Supreme Court justice. She'd probably be better than some of them, but she's not one. 51% of our college students think it's all right to shout down folks you don't agree with. That's troubling to me. And we see that on campuses all over. We should be able to respect those differences and hear them. Doesn't mean we agree with it. We can get up and say we disagree, but we're shouting them down. That to me is part of not understanding our fundamental rights as Americans. 20% think it's all right to commit violence against groups you don't agree with. 37% don't know a single right in our First Amendment. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, the right to petition, to assemble, the right to worship, exercise your faith freely. 37% can't give you one. And 74% can't name the 3 branches of government. So I come back, we need to do better there as well. And I think it starts with our families. Can't put it all on schools, but schools are part of the solution. So what do they swear to when they swear to support and defend the Constitution? I think we got to do better. And I think, too, as I summarize my comments, we're a volunteer force. And I think all those who are here today that have served, our 3 stars, our 2 stars, our generals here today, I was so honored to serve with all those that are volunteered. They are selfless. I mean, who else would work with you 18 hours a day in Iraq in 120-degree heat? And they do it as a volunteer. And I just think I have 4 deployments to see it firsthand. Who else would get in a convoy and every preceding day there was an IED on that convoy run? Right? The selfless nature of our servicemen and women, I treasure. And I love serving with them. But if we only can get to or access 29%, what is the military eventually? If we don't turn this around, where will the military recruit from? Where does the world's strongest military, the best military, able to sustain itself if these numbers continue to decline? So today we'll be focused on how we do turn that around. How do we turn around our physical conditioning, the mental health areas, our educational system that also some people get out to get in the military. So we have lots of work to do. And overall, it's about changing a culture. And I remember studying that as a lieutenant. It's very hard to do. And it takes a lot of work. But we have a good team working at it. So I'm ready to put my rucksack on this one and give it a go. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. I just want to close with a thought. And it's a quote that's probably been used at this building more often than probably maybe any other quote. And it's from Ronald Reagan. We cannot take our freedom for granted. We do. We've had it since, we declared our independence in 1776. Our Constitution in 1789 became enacted. And we've been blessed with a country with a rich tradition of freedom, and it's gotten stronger over the years, where we've included our liberties to everyone. But we can't take it for granted. We're always one generation away, potentially, of losing that freedom. And this is an area, it's a threat that we need to tackle now if we want to help preserve this freedom for our kids and grandkids. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks for inviting me.
It's our new Heritage coin. Congressman, thank you so much for coming over and giving us those keynote remarks.
I collect them.
Okay, good. There was a new one for you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, please bear with us. We're going to set the panel up. It'll take us about 2 minutes to do so. So thank you, sir. And I think Colonel Bennett is going to.
Thank you. It's good talking to you.
Well, that was really good, and I hope you all appreciated that. Well, over there, Congressman had to go back. I guess they're starting votes at 10-something or something like that, so they're going back and they're working on the business of the country. And part of that business is figuring out how to potentially fund the Department of Defense in the 2018 fiscal year, which you're probably paying attention, started a couple weeks ago. And so the Armed Services Committee and the President have each submitted requests which represent fairly significant increases on last year's budget. But more money, as we're going to talk about today, is not all that is needed. Our military depends on a constant flow of men and women willing and able to serve in the armed forces. And as the Congressman mentioned, despite a U.S. population of 323 million people, a youth population around between 17 and 24 years of age of around 32 million, our nation's ability to find and attract qualified volunteers is in jeopardy. I'm excited about this panel of experts we have here today. They're experienced officers who have seen this issue firsthand for many years, and let me introduce them briefly. To my left, Major General Jeff Snow. General Snow is the commanding general of the U.S. Army Recruiting Command at Fort Knox, Kentucky. He was commissioned as a lieutenant of infantry in 1983 after graduation from the United States Military Academy. His career spans over 34 years. He has served in a variety of command and staff assignments in the United States, Germany, Kosovo, Kuwait, and Iraq. He has master's degrees in social psychology and strategic studies. To his left, Lieutenant General John Mick Bednarik, U.S. Army, retired. Lieutenant General Bednarik retired in 2015 after nearly 40 years of military service. His final assignment in the Army was as the senior defense official in Iraq and chief of the Office of Security Cooperation in Baghdad, a position he held for 26 months. In that capacity, he coordinated security cooperation and security assistance activities to strengthen the strategic partnership and promote a unified, democratic, stable, self-reliant, and regionally integrated Iraq. General Bednarik served in a wide variety of senior command and staff positions in the United States, Middle East, Europe, and the Pacific, commanding at every echelon from company to Army level, culminating in command of the 1st United States Army, responsible for the training and readiness of our nation's Guard and Reserve forces for worldwide deployment, and he is, in fact, a proud member of Mission Readiness. And our final panel member is Major General Malcolm Frost, the commanding general for the Army's Center for Initial Military Training, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, responsible for annually transforming 120,000 civilian volunteers into soldiers who are physically ready, grounded in Army values, competent in their skills, and able to contribute as leaders and team members upon their arrival at their first Army unit of assignment. General Frost's experience includes company, battalion, and brigade levels of command and a variety of assignments, including the United States, Italy, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Hawaii, Iraq, and Afghanistan. General Frost is a native of Torrance, California, received his commission in infantry after graduating from the United States Military Academy at West Point in 1988. He holds master's degrees in human resources development from Webster University and national security studies from the Army War College. I should mention that before I had even met General Bednarik, the first email I got from him closed with the statement, "Stay fit." And I was like, who is this guy, you know? And every email I've ever gotten from him and every discussion that we've had since then always ends with stay fit. And so that reflects his passion in fitness. So each panelist.
Which means I hope all of you got up and did some kind of physical readiness training this morning, right?
Or they can at least close the day with it, at least as long as you get it in sometime during the day. But each panelist will talk for about 10 minutes or so, and then at the end we'll be ready to take your questions. So please be thinking about questions. And so, General Snow, sir, if we could start with you.
Hey, thanks, sir, and really thanks for having me here today. I'll be honest with you, I'm here today because I do need your help. I know many of you are already actively battling societal issues in order to protect our future security of the country, and in that spirit of giving, I might just ask you to do a little bit more. As the Army's chief recruiter, I can tell you our mission isn't getting any easier. In fact, in the Army, we saw a historic in-year mission increase in 2017. Despite what many of you may have read in yesterday's USA Today article, I'm kind of hoping some of you didn't read it, but if you did, I have to tell you the Army is not lowering standards. And if you read the headlines, that may have been what you took away, and so I want to talk a little bit about that. First, I'd like to say I'm incredibly proud of the hard work our team of recruiters do. Almost 9,000 recruiters across the United States and overseas. And all they did to make our fiscal year regular Army mission of 68,500 new soldiers. They did what many thought couldn't be done, and we'll get into some of the reasons why. And they did it while exceeding the Department of Defense quality benchmarks that are outlined in law. So what should have been a success story about the tireless efforts of our recruiters to help nearly 69,000 individuals find a full-time career with the Army became a skewed story focusing on but a small fraction of recruits. Quality is a priority for us in the recruiting command, as it is for the Army leadership. Our recruiters exceeded all Department of Defense quality benchmarks in fiscal year 2017, despite receiving the largest in-year mission increase in the history of the all-volunteer force in January. That actually was a 6,000 increase. Tremendous challenge for our team of recruiters stationed across the country and its territories, and I am proud of them. You know, did we bring in some individuals who scored in the lower category, what we call Category 4? Yes. Did we enlist some people who met all of the qualifications to serve but had to get a waiver for past marijuana use? Yes. But I have to tell you, we're a microcosm of society, and 8 states have legalized marijuana. As long as it is not a pattern of misconduct, I think they should be afforded the opportunity to serve. The data in the article is correct, however, that this totals about 1,800 recruits, which is a small fraction. So when you add the Category 4s and you add those marijuana waivers, which increased by a little over 300 in 1 year, that's 2.7% of 68,682 individuals we recruited. And I have to tell you, that's well within the quality benchmark. So despite what you may have read, the team did not fail. We recruited a high-quality force for Army. Now that the new fiscal year has begun, and so this fiscal year mission, it actually starts a couple of weeks before 1 of October. You know, my team is not resting. Instead, they're charging ahead with another historic mission increase. We've been given the mission to recruit 80,000 new active duty soldiers in fiscal year 18. And we also have a mission to recruit for the Army Reserve. So 1 Army, 3 components, we recruit for 2 of them. When you talk about the National Guard really falls under the purview of the adjutant generals, although we are starting to do a pilot to recruit as 1 Army, and I'm happy to talk about that in the Q&A part. So to put this in context, though, we haven't met both volume and quality with this larger mission in 20 years. And we're starting with the lowest entry pool we have in a decade. So it's not going to be easy, but I think we can do it if we have help from community leaders and folks like you in this room or listening to this on the web. As many of you know, our military is filled with an incredibly talented pool of individuals. For many years, I admit, I took those talented individuals for granted. I really didn't think about how they became part of the organization. I just expected them to be there. Now, after more than 2 years leading U.S. Army Recruiting Command, I can tell you my perspective has changed. The foundation, as you heard from just heard from the congressman, is foundation of the military is its people, and recruiting those people is a no-fail mission. The security of our country depends on what our recruiters do every day. I know many in this room understand all the military has to offer for a young person seeking experience, education, and a piece of something bigger than themselves. I wish I could say that is the same thing for Americans across the country. As I have discovered in the recruiting business, they don't. I know we are throwing out statistics, and I've got a lot for you, but I'll just hit a couple. Unfortunately, 50% of the youth admit to knowing little to nothing about what our service members are doing on a daily basis. Many of them can't even name all of the services. As I travel across this country, many thank me for my service, but they truly do not know what that service entails. This is disheartening to me, and I'm sure it is to many of you as well. What they think they know comes from movies and the news. I'm not here to speak ill of either, but you and I know this doesn't paint an honest picture of the work we do every day. Instead of seeing the opportunity to become an engineer, an electrician, vet tech, a firefighter, an IT specialist, America's youth see only the pain and the hurt. They bleed it if they enlist, and I'm troubled by this. It is likely that they will be damaged in some way. Now, most in this room know there are challenges and triumphs in the military. We all have both heartbreaking and celebratory challenges in our histories. We all know this is not a risk-free profession, but we know what most Americans don't. We know the incredible people who stand up to serve for our country each and every day. We know our military has given them opportunities to earn multiple degrees, learn new languages, and travel across the world. We know they have skills that could easily transfer to the private sector, and we know that their families have unmatched resources. And we know, and this is one thing I'd like to highlight, that even after they complete their terms of service, our veterans, and I know there are many in this room that are reflective of this, they remain dedicated members of society who are more likely to vote, volunteer, and contribute than their counterparts who have not served. We know all this and much more. Our country needs to know this too. I wholeheartedly believe if our country truly knew what we know, we wouldn't have a recruiting problem. Now, I know you've all heard the statistics, and the congressman hit it today. 71% of the youth do not qualify for military service. This is true, and it is a challenge. And that's really, when we say that, what we mean is they either don't meet the cognitive, the physical, and the moral requirements to serve. But I don't think it's a challenge that we can't overcome. I am concerned, and I need your help to address it, and that's tough for us in uniform to address that particular issue. But even with that staggering statistic, there are still more than enough people who are qualified to serve. The problem is that many of the qualified individuals don't truly understand the opportunities right in front of them. So we need to help them understand that, and we need your help to get the word out to our youth. I know there are many veterans in the audience, and you all have a story to tell. And I know each of you know other veterans who also have a story to tell. Veterans only make up 7% of the population, so we need to work together to educate the 93% that are not veterans. I ask that you take the time to get to know the recruiters in your area. Again, some 9,000 recruiters. I will guarantee you there is a recruiting center near you. You've probably driven by it and you don't even know it, okay? But I would ask you, take the time to stop in there and talk to one of the recruiters. It doesn't matter which service, just reach out. They can tell you where they're having trouble with access to schools. And I'll tell you, we may have access that meets the letter of law, and I'm happy to talk about this, but I am not convinced we've got access, true access that allows us to talk to the youth so that they make an informed decisions. And I have to tell you this, although I may be in uniform, I truly believe sometimes it takes someone who's not in uniform to open up the eyes of community and school leaders. So I look forward to your questions and to working together to continue to maintain the greatest army in the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, General Snow. I think we'll go to you next, General Frost, if you're prepared, and thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks. First, I'd like to thank the Heritage Foundation, thank Mission Readiness, and General Sport. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this panel, and to everyone that's here in the audience, thank you for coming, and for those that are online as well. One thing General Sport didn't say was my previous job was the Chief of Public Affairs for the Army, so in charge of all the strategic communications, media relations for the Army. And one of the challenges I tried to tackle and looked at and had kind of some deep insights into is the one that we're talking about today, and that General Snow has articulated, that the Representative Bacon talked about as well. And I'm going to kind of rehash some things and kind of try and paint this. And I see this challenge of fitness as just one part of what is also a greater challenge, and it was alluded to already. Again, about 323 million Americans, 32 to 34 million, age 17 to 24, 29%. So that gets you somewhere around 10.5 million, depending on the statistic, that are in that kind of recruitable population that can qualify for physical, mental, or standards-based reasons. But there's a greater challenge, and that is the propensity to serve within that population. And so when you look at that, you're looking at somewhere on the order of about 4% of that. So about 380,000 to 400,000 have a propensity to serve. And you look at the highest quality, highest propensity to serve, and it breaks down to somewhere around 150,000 folks. The Army needs every year about 120 to 130,000 across the board. And so think about that. And so you combine that with what I would call the challenge that we have is it's the civ mil drift, as it's been called, or divide. And I want to paint it to you in this context. Since the all-volunteer force came about, a lot of things have happened. So very, very few serve, less than 1% in the all-volunteer force. We've gone past Vietnam and Desert Storm. You had the information technology boom happened. You had fitness has gone down, as Representative Bacon talked about, and kids are not doing other things. And how did our youth and how did America over the last 15 to 20 years get to know their military and especially their Army? And I would argue that the Army recruits and trains more people than all the other services combined. We are the canary in the coal mine when it comes to, because we are people-based, unlike the other services are more platform-based, although people are critical. But we're the canary in the coal mine with respect to this national security. And I would argue it's an existential threat in the future. As we look at threats and adversaries, we talk about the 4+1. We talk about China and Russia and Iran and North Korea and terrorism. The only existential threat truly that we have today to our nation, quite frankly, it's the nuclear capability of Russia. But I would argue that the next existential threat we have, maybe a generation down the line, is the inability to man, and I say man in a gender non-specific way, men and women, to serve in our military. And so again, what happened in the last 15 to 20 years is America got to know us, I like to say, through the lens of warfare, thrust into their living rooms every single day. Soldiers in the desert killing terrorists. That's how they know us. And then soldiers getting wounded and soldiers getting killed. And what happened is we have grown apart. That's the one way they know us. Where are we? Just look at where the Army is. I'll talk about the Army. 80% of the active duty Army is in 5 states in the Union. 5 of our 50. We are where? We are rurally based in the Bible Belt, the smiley face, I like to call it, of America. We are not in urban America. We're not where Americans live in the cities. We live in military-gated communities. We are disconnected from the citizenry we serve, I would argue. 79% of us who wear this uniform, the Army uniform, the 4 of us, have a family member that served in the military. Again, becoming a warrior class unto ourselves, disconnected and not representative of the citizenry we serve. So I think this is all connected to a larger problem, which is the problem of us drifting away from civilian society. And my fear is that what often happens in American society and culturally is until something catastrophic occurs, we do not act. And we've seen that back from the days of Pearl Harbor all the way up to 9/11. And my fear is, what is that going to be when it comes to this threat to our national security, which is the inability to provide qualified people, volunteers to serve in our military, and then what is next? So I kind of frame it from that standpoint, and I'd be happy to answer questions in that vein. I do think that it can be fixed, but where's it got to be fixed? Who's going to tell the story of what we do? The fact that soldiers or those serving in the military, the leadership qualities, the education, the skills, the values, the character that you gain by serving. We have to tell it, and our veterans have to tell it, and we have to tell it in the communities across America. And there are ways to get after that. And that's where I would say, like General Snow said, we need your assistance. We need your assistance to do that. So with that, I just say very briefly, thank you very much. I do think the youth programs like Junior ROTC, how can we look at programs where the military can get into the communities in America in a more systematic fashion to get after discipline, to get after fitness, and just get into the youth of America so they better understand who we are, and at the same time we can help them become more fit, and more capable and more eligible to serve, and not just that, the desire, because they understand us better. And that's, I think, is a problem that this weaves into as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop and look forward to questions. So thanks, sir.
General Frost, thank you very much. And General Bednarik, sir, over to you, please.
No, Tom, thanks. Hey, to everybody here, I'm going to take a slightly different approach. So you've heard a lot of statistics. You know, statistics don't lie, only statisticians. I'd highlight to you, though, that all of that you have heard, percentages, 71%, you know, X amount of our nation, our military locations, et cetera, those are all true. So this is not some kind of a spin X of highlighting just because we are here focusing on the mission readiness and the youth of our nation. It's also, I want to make sure that even though all of the panel members, including Tom and I, are Army, and as Representative Bacon highlighted it with his Air Force background, hey, listen, this is not just an Army problem. This is not even a joint problem of all the services. This is a national issue tied to the security of the United States of America. Period, blank, up front and in your face. And if we collectively as a nation do not address this, it is not just about readiness, but you kind of look in the context of the future and the strategy of America, regardless of this administration or not, has nothing to do with it. This is a problem that has existed for quite some time. It is getting worse, not better. So we've talked about the challenges. We've talked about the statistics. We've talked about the readiness. We've talked about the recruiting challenges, where they are located. And both Jeff and Malcolm have highlighted all of this. But we as a nation and those that serve in uniform, regardless of color of that uniform, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, our Coast Guardsmen, and those others that serve in uniform to defend the freedoms that we hold close to all of our hearts and chest, those individuals, the 71%, I mean, hell, they're not even eligible to join the military if they wanted to. So it's about options. You know, I highlight to my kids, you know, it is all about options, and the more options you have, the better you are. Whether they decide to go into the military to serve our nation or not is not the point. The services provide an incredible capability and an incredible institution of values, of ethics, of behavior, of growth, to grow the citizens stronger for this nation, regardless of their chosen profession. So, what I really want to have everybody here take away, and perhaps tee up a few questions. So, put it in these three categories. So, what the hell are we doing about it? So, we've talked about the problem set. We've talked about the issues. And we've talked about, thankfully, organizations, nonprofit organizations like Mission Readiness and the Heritage team here that helps tee this up. But this is a national issue that unfortunately is not getting the appropriate attention, information, and direction that it really needs. So there's probably three things that I would offer to you as sound bites that we as a nation need to get after and have started, but we've got a long way to go, and it's not getting the visibility as both Malcolm, certainly Tom, and Jeff has highlighted. Number one is to improve education. It really, and it starts with our early childhood education as well. And the focus of math and reading, those fundamental skill sets that all of us, I think, certainly in this audience, perhaps take for granted. but Middletown, America, and many of the locations that Malcolm highlighted, they just do not have that opportunity, perhaps, that they certainly need to. And early childhood education provides proven results of all kinds of different, besides overall performance, boost graduation rates, and also provides an opportunity for youth, whether they're disadvantaged youth or others, to get out of crime and look for a better opportunity and a better way of life. Again, back to the point I mentioned earlier, give them an option to join the military if they wanted to. But even if they don't, that's okay. Make them a better citizen of the United States of America. And it just reinforces, the childhood education reinforces just positive behavior and positive habits. Number two is the healthier school nutrition options. Okay, so many in here know 2010 Child Nutrition Act. Our legislators assisted us in passing, kind of working through that. Good thing. There's been about $200 million over the past 6 years that have provided states and education forums to assist with healthier meals. But so that sounds good and briefs well. A lot of people doing high fives and say, okay, we are making a difference for whole grain foods, better nutrition options, as opposed to the 22 grams of fat sausage patty that you see the first thing in the food line. That's not where we want to go as a nation. And again, it's not only about healthier options and healthier choices, but again, back to child nutrition, child health, and child education, so people can make those right choices. And these healthier nutritions gets exactly to the point that all the panel's members about one of the biggest problems we have with this 71% statistic is obesity. You know, how many in here have read the book, The Fattening of America? Well, that's exactly what we're talking about. And so, although there's been a lot of dollars and resources tied to the Child Nutrition Act, you still have a lot of states, you still have a lot of challenges of those, quote, school lunch programs that don't have the equipment that they need to cook those healthier meals. And so the states and our governors and our legislators are looking hard at that. But that's where, again, education for all of us and the press and push to our legislators to continue to assist in this effort for the second order effects of that, which is what we are talking about here with mission readiness this morning, about providing opportunities for the youth of America to have those choices in the future. So that was number two. And the third and final one, it has to do with the physical fitness and the readiness. And again, the bottom line is we just got to get up off of our backsides, putting it nicely, and get active, get healthy. And most everybody in here recognizes that, unfortunately, there are no structured physical fitness programs in many of our schools, including high schools. I mean, 60% of early childhood education, has a recess. Some of it's structured. Most of it is just Overwatch, but there's no direction and guidance. 80% of our high schoolers, there is no requirement for physical fitness programs in a high school for a graduation requirement. I'll leave that up to you to think if that's a good thing or not. I have my own opinions, but again, those three things of improving our education, healthier school nutrition opportunities, and just getting off of what we in the military, particularly in the Army, would call getting up off of our fourth point of contact, getting up off of our backside, and getting moving and getting active and staying healthy and fit to get after this obesity problem will go a heck of a long way. Again, as Malcolm highlighted, thanks to everybody for coming today. But I would ask you to spread the word and get this out. We need to get a heck of a lot wider audience in highlighting this. Again, not an Army problem, not a joint problem. This is a national security impact issue with second order effects of our nation.
Not a wider audience, but a more breadth.
Broader scope.
Narrow but broader scope. Yes, thank you.
Tom, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mick. That was wonderful. So, ladies and gentlemen, we have some time for questions, and I think somebody's manning a microphone. I think somewhere there he is. Please wait for the microphone, because then our online audience will be able to hear you, and it'll be captured forever on our website as well. Please, if you would, state your name. If you have an affiliation, mention that, and then please also make sure your question is, in fact, a question and not a statement masquerading as a question. So I think you, sir, over in the, right there, please.
Yeah, Larry Taylor, retired Marine Corps. Why is it that nobody in Washington seems to realize that the base realignment and closure process, BRAC, further isolates and insulates the military from the rest of America that we serve? Every time we close a National Guard armory, a reserve center, a base, makes the problem that was described so eloquently worse and worse and worse. Yes, we save a few dollars. Is it worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'll just add my commentary and then see if anybody, I mean, obviously the most efficient military would be one giant mega base, you know, that's like 70 miles across, but that just severs all the bonds between us and America. Anybody want to comment on this?
I will just say this. I'll kind of stay in my lane. Other than to tell you this, though, you know, as Malcolm referred to, and I will attest to, where we have more post camps and stations, and there's more interaction with those in uniform, youth are more likely to know a little bit more about the military, and I think they're more likely to serve. It is interesting. It's a little sad. You know, many of us have served abroad, and what you find is there are some that have never engaged with an American. It doesn't matter what service. And then whether you talk Iraq or Afghanistan, they engage with Americans. And all of a sudden they see, you know, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and or the United States in a different light because of that interaction. Quite frankly, this drift that was alluded to by Malcolm, it's here in the United States, and so this is a challenge. I mean, that's why, you know, we say we draw with the happy face, you know, and there's propensity is greater in those areas, but I think there's a reason for it. That's because you have more post camps and stations in those areas. So this is a challenge, but it's a wicked problem because it does cost an awful lot of money, and you know, tough for me to say, you know, as you're trying to balance this for our nation, you know, how to address that. I do know this. In some cases, we have, you know, within the Army, I could speak to the Army, we have, in some cases, contracted, okay, for the reasons General Spore said, but we realized that wasn't working. We truly want to be representative of the United States. So, in fact, where we contracted, we took a look at that and we thought, no, this isn't right. And so we've actually expanded. Each of the services going about this a little bit differently. Many of our recruiting centers are joint, some are not, and we're all struggling to balance this very issue.
Sir, I'll comment. I will go outside of my lane because, quite frankly, I'm okay with that. So I agree with you. You know, I think often what we do when we have you know, leaders that come in and out of our military, whether they're politically appointed or whether they're not, and even some of us who wear the uniform. Sometimes we tend to take that short-term view, looking at the fiscal aspects and what it's going to take, you know, because if we migrate funds and we save funds by closing down installations or places where we're not utilizing the space as well, we're going to save this much money, which we can then put into, you know, if not our current readiness, maybe into a modernization program. They're all well intended, right? Because right now, the United States Army, I mean, we've got 180,000 soldiers in 140 countries around the world today. We have mortgaged our future readiness to a degree to pay for current readiness, just to be able to do what we're doing today across the globe as the environmental conditions have changed while we were downsizing, and now we're starting to increase again. However, you look at all that, and that's the problem, the wicked problem set of today. But you're right. The challenge becomes, you know, if we're not careful, if we continue to focus and think that BRAC is a solution for today and will get us fiscal gains, even in the near future, I think there are longer-term effects that have to be measured and understood And I think we're starting to see a little bit of that, I hope, in Congress. And with some of our leaders and policymakers, I'm not sure, but I think that's a discussion point that needs to happen. That is in addition to all of the other reasons people are for or against BRAC. It's just a great point, and I couldn't agree with you more, sir.
Great. Okay, in the back, way at the back there. Please.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up in the spirit of getting fit. Michaela Dodge,
Oh.
here at Heritage. It's a question for General Snow. You mentioned that something like 2.7% of recruits did not meet all the standards to join the Army. And I think that may or may not be significant depending on how much trouble they cause to the Army down the line. So based on previous historical data, do you have a way to assess, evaluate, and track how kind of troublesome that population is, if it is, relative to the rest of the recruits? Thank you.
Thanks for the question, but I'm glad you asked the question because that's not what I said. Those 2.77% in fact did meet the qualifications to join the military. So let me talk for a second what the benchmarks are, because I know there's confusion out there. One is that 90% of high school, 90% of those that join must have a high school diploma. Okay, they got to be a high school graduate. The reason for that is that we've determined that those that there's a stick-to-itiveness factor. Those that actually complete high school more likely to complete their first term of enlistment. 60% must be defined as quality, and we define quality as those individuals that perform particularly well on the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, and we have different scales of view. So, 1 alpha, 2 alpha, 3 alpha. So 1 to 3 alpha are determined quality. By law, 60% of those that join must be in that higher category. Why? They're more likely to learn a skill, and again, they're more likely to stay. And then the third aspect of that is less than 4% can be in that category score, that lower tier of scoring on the ASVAB. So they meet the criteria, so they meet all of the standards. It's just that again, some of them were in that lower category. Okay, same with the waivers. I mean, we really subscribe to a whole person construct. And so, depending on the specialty, and the Army's got in excess of 150 specialties, we define a cognitive requirement, a physical requirement, and then the moral is consistent across all of them. But we have a waiver process to, again, take a look at that if there's an issue. So say, for an example, youth get in trouble. We have a procedure to look at that from a waiver perspective. And again, as long as it doesn't constitute a pattern where clearly you look at this and an individual is going to struggle with authority, we'd like to afford them the opportunity to serve. But those that do make it through that process, okay, they have met all of the criteria to serve. They still are part of the less than 1% that have made the decision to serve their country. So. Now, in terms of your last part of your question, how do you track that? Actually, and I'll turn it over to Malcolm. This is something the Army is taking a look at. One is we do track some aspects of it. So if I could just address one of them, one of the challenges the Army was facing is that you picked a number, all three components, about 120,000 a year. What was happening is many of them were getting hurt during their first term of enlistment. And so as an Army, we lose in about 11%. So from a business perspective, and we're not a business, we are a large organization, okay? But it doesn't take Einstein to figure out if we're spending all this time to a gender commitment and 11% are being hurt physically, we should do something about it. So the Army did. The Army spent a couple of years putting together and developing the occupational, physical, and assessment test, because there is a concern about the fitness coming in, and we started that. We're the first service to actually start it this past year. It's a 4-part test designed by scientists that is consistent with whatever those specialties are. We have defined a general neutral standard, and now we provide them this test. And again, 4-part test. It's supposed to be predictive in nature. which means if they perform well here, they should be able to meet the physical demands of that particular specialty. And I'll flick it over to Malcolm, but we are beginning to see that's humping. Now, the last part, then Malcolm, I'll turn it over to you. We are looking at other things. So we truly want to understand why is it that individuals are unable to make it through their first term of enlistment. You know, part of it is the physical aspect, but there's also been references to behavioral health. Although we screen for that, I will tell you there is not a perfect screening tool, and to a certain extent, we are relying upon what the information that individual provides. And we have a good system, and we've got medical doctors doing that analysis. So those aren't my recruiters. They were not qualified to make that calls. So we actually have what we call chief medical officers that assess those files. What we find in some cases is that those individuals are not forthcoming. And right now, from a medical perspective, we don't, we're relying upon what they provide. In some cases, we can't always check that. So that's something that we're working through also. Malcolm.
It's a couple of points. I'd say the standards that General Snow talked about, those standards have been pretty tried and true. When we have dipped below those standards, like we had to do during the surge in Iraq, when we dipped below those standards and brought lower quality soldiers in and made a conscious decision, because why? Because we were at war. We were in 2 wars, and we had to do that in order to man the force to a point where we could execute both Afghanistan, Iraq, and other commitments across the globe. We found that when we dipped below those standards, we had more problems. We had more challenges, and we had a group of individuals, not all of them, but large. There were largely due to those that were in that lower standard category, ended up eventually having larger issues, whether it was physical, whether it was discipline, standards-based conduct, or what have you. So those standards are pretty tried and true, which is why the Army meeting them and sticking to them is so important. The second thing I would tell you is that reference the physical fitness aspect in coming in, the attrition rates. So in initial entry training, the attrition rate's about 11.5%. Generally, it's been that over time. We have been able to push that down to 10%. You say, wow, that sounds like a lot, especially when we're talking about the numbers. For basic training only, enlisted 70,000. That's about 7,000 a year that attrit out, and 80% of that attrition is for 2 reasons. It's failure to adapt into the military, or it's for mental or physical reasons. One of those categories. And the one that we immediately can get after is, as General Snow talked about, trying to understand a little bit of the behavioral health side or the mental side or what didn't come in. We said we can get after the physical piece. And what we found out is, physical fitness, we really looked at this. There are 5 aspects of physical fitness that we need to have soldiers, we think, but probably all services. And it's muscular endurance, it's cardiovascular endurance, it's speed and agility, explosive power, and muscular strength. And so this test was scientifically developed, these 4, in order to both ensure that you could be physically fit enough to become a soldier so you don't have the musculoskeletal injuries that we are seeing in basic training. And it was also so that we could also earmark you toward a military occupational skill based on how you performed in those tests. And here's the bottom line. Here's the bottom. And I think we talked about this. When we grew up in the military and we came in, we were marinated steaks. You just threw us on the grill, baby, and we were going. We were in. Well, now we're getting frozen steaks. I mean, we are. We're getting less ready, less ready to grill, less ready to go, and they got to thaw, and then you got to marinate, right? And then you put them on the grill. I would argue, in sometimes what we're doing is we're going out to the field and we got to slaughter the cow and process it. Okay? And I don't mean to compare people to like pieces of meat, but my point is that it's the process. And now the recruiters have physical training programs and where they are actually training fitness programs and regimens for young recruits so that they can be physically fit to pass this test to become a soldier. That's where we are. We're already reaching deeper in than what recruiters used to do in order to get soldiers who can qualify. How much further do we need to go? We're going to see. And that's why I said we've got to get in to where the youth are and what you all are talking about to get in after that physical fitness. So, thanks.
Great question.
Yeah, great question.
Sorry. Oh, okay, yeah. JV.
General Snow, J.V. Venable, I'm here with the Heritage Foundation. Secretary Ash Carter had some initiatives near the end of his tenure as the Secretary of Defense that could have long-lasting impact, and I understand they were under study, but the two that were significant talked about cyber warriors and heading down that path, about the specialty where you have this niche that really smart kids and young adults that may not be able to pass the physical standards of the military, and relaxing the standards in order to let them in. And that's the first of the two. And the second one was lateral entry, where you have someone who is a really experienced IT professional, comes in as a major, a captain, an E4, E6, something along those lines. Would you all tackle that and give us your thoughts on what your feelings are on it?
Yeah, there is a concerted effort. Obviously, if you look at the Army, and we formed a cyber command, and I know we are in a quest for talent, and I know that was under consideration. Thus far, from an accessions perspective, that's still kind of being deliberated. So it's not had an impact on us just yet. Again, I'm familiar with the proposals. I think somehow in the transition between the administrations and the secretaries, I've kind of lost a bubble on where that one is right now. And on the second one, I mean, there was a cyber one, and what was the second one again? It was the
Lateraling.
lateral. Yeah, same way. That's still very much, I think, under discussion. And thus far, I've not seen anything changing the guidance to us to explore that. There is one aspect of that maybe is kind of linked to it, which is, we tend to place a lot of emphasis on what we call the non-prior service, those that have never served in the military. But for the Army Reserve, we also reach out to prior service individuals, and particularly, during the drawdown, for many years, again, the Army was not alone. We were concerned about the drawdown. We had a combat seasoned force, but everybody was kind of looking for the peace dividend in the wake of the pending drawdown. And so we'd been in a period when we were drawing down for 4 years. And there was a concern, I know, in the Army senior leadership, because we had a combat seasoned force. And these are quality individuals that we were having to separate. So there's a concerted effort to actually go after those that perhaps did not want to go, but had to go. And I know this past year, part of the reason that we had success is we had a deliberate campaign to go after those that had served previously and had a skill set to bring them back in. And we increased, by almost 2/3. So in a given year, say about 1,000 this year, we brought 3,000 in. But specifically to the lateral moves, the one part that we do that very well is actually in the medical field. And then a lot of folks don't realize it, again, because we focus on the non-prior service, prior service. And you know what? I have to say this myself. I was in the Army 32 years before going into this position, and I guess I just assumed that we grew doctors, nurses, medical specialties on trees. I just took them for granted. And you know what? I now have a brigade and 5 battalion that focuses on that mission. And the reality is there are many that have been very successful in their youth, but they want to serve their country. And so we do bring those in. We do a grade determination. We bring them in at various lengths, and we're less concerned about the physical standards. So there is, I think, a precedent for doing this. It's just that we've not universally applied that to the other specialties. It's still under consideration.
Yeah, I'd agree. And probably the second part of your question, JV, on the lateral entry is exactly, not medical, our chaplains as another incredible shortfall across all of the services, again, regardless of color of uniform. The cyber warriors and other specialty and unique critical skill functions that the Department of Defense is looking at from a broader view, and that's where Ash Carter tasked us, hey, let's take a look at this. Do we need to have a policy change or adjustment to allow that capability that we need for the technological challenges of the future? But the bottom line still remains. So I'm a combatant commander overseas, whether I'm in CENTCOM running 21 countries, including Iraq and Afghanistan, or General Waldhauser, who has AFRICOM, et cetera. And I want to have a cyber support team, with me. I had some in Baghdad, but those individuals if you bring them in to have some modicum, or as Jeff highlighted with the adjustments of entry-level standards, those individuals still have to react to indirect fire. They still have to be prepared to put on a protective mask in case of chemical attack, et cetera, et cetera. So you just cannot waive, okay, we don't need you to have that capability or that skill. And again, that is the standard that remains absolute.
So I would also tell you, so my wife is the director of cyber for the Army on the Army staff. So I kind of know a little bit about this, or at least I'm dangerous, right? So what I would tell you is contrary to and I'm sure I have heard, somewhere I've heard that there are 400-pound people who know cyber who are sitting on their beds and can't get off, right? I've heard that somewhere. But contrary to popular belief, the cyber individuals that we're getting in the United States Army, they're fit. They are not what you might think. Now, maybe those are out there, but the ones that we are getting are actually in pretty good shape. It's interesting, those that have that mental ability and have really tested themselves and pushed themselves on the mental side, it seems to be a character trait with holistic fitness for them, and they are physically fit as well. And so, I've gone and seen the brigades that are at NSA Georgia or up at Fort Meade, and those soldiers are sharp and they are fit. And so I would just be very careful to not stereotype. Just because you are an expert in cyber doesn't mean that you can't meet other standards for the military or the Army. So I would offer that to you. And again, I would just echo the lateral piece. I think for certain skills, we already do it. We have very shortened programs for basic training, the basic types of training for those various skill sets. Instead of doing the full 10 weeks or et cetera, they'll go through an abridged version to get just the basics before they go on to their skills training, whether it's medical chaplaincy or others. So we kind of do already have lateral entries for certain skills. I know that the cyber community, specifically in the Army, is still reviewing this in accordance with Secretary Carter's initiatives with our Army G1 and Department of the Army and DOD, but no policy has come out yet with respect. But I would not be surprised if at some point we may see that.
Great question. I just want to add to General Bednarik's point, that's talking about specialties. You never know where people are going to end up. And so as you heard, we had 4 soldiers killed in Niger. I think it was this week or this weekend. One of them was a chemical soldier, a chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear soldier, Staff Sergeant Johnson. Never would have thought he would have been in the middle of Niger on a patrol, but he was. And so you never know once you come in the services where you will ultimately end up. I think there was a question over here there.
Yeah, hi. I'm Russ Green. I'm Director of Government Relations at CrossFit, the fitness company. So first of all, I have a little bit of bad news. Yeah. I think you guys might have actually understated the extent of the problem. Chronic disease is responsible for 88% of the deaths in the United States. So that's diabetes, heart disease, most types of cancer. And that's, again, over 2 million deaths, almost entirely preventable and due to lifestyle causes. That is a lack of exercise and poor nutrition. This is costing the United States $2.7 trillion every year in healthcare costs treating this chronically diseased population. So this is without a doubt an existential threat. So based on that, therefore, 2 questions for you guys. First, how can CrossFit and the fitness industry generally help prepare or work with you guys to create a fitter population that is more prepared for military service, but also for all of the challenges of American life? And then secondly, how can we raise public and policymaker attention on this critical issue in conjunction with you guys? Thank you.
Those are great questions. I don't know if anybody wants to...
Yeah, if we had the answers to those, we wouldn't be here, right? So thanks for the easy questions. Yeah. It's tough. I really think as we go over time, how the Army has had to reach down with respect to fitness and starting, what General Snow's team's doing out there. I mean, recruiters are out there. It's incredible to see what they do just to try and help youth to become, how can, partnering, we specifically obviously can't endorse or partner with one specific entity, but I think as a community, what I think I would want organizations or entities to do in general would be to how can we get into schools, how can we get into the youth, and where do we do that within your ability, your resources, your et cetera. And quite frankly, there's probably a long-term benefit, I would think, business-wise, to an organization as well that decided to invest in the youth in the schools. So I would offer that I think that's just how we have to do it. How we do it, the mechanics of it, that's the hard part. How is there a partnership with the military at some point? I think that's probably possible as well. Maybe it's at the local level, not necessarily all the way up here at the Pentagon, right? So I would just offer a couple of those thoughts. It's probably not the answer you wanted to hear. I don't know if anyone else has other thoughts.
Listen, I think it's a great question. I don't think anybody disagrees with what you're saying. To me, this is an existential threat. In part, you talk about fitness, but you talk about the health concerns too, and the growing cost of health insurance and stuff like that. Obviously, the more money we spend on that, the less money you can spend in other parts of the country. So I'm concerned. One of the things that we can do is, I think for the military, it's tough for us to address this particular concern. What we can do is at least share our perspective on what we're seeing of those that are coming in. We can participate in panels like this, but we're really relying upon you to go back to just talk more about this. Obviously, encourage youth to be more involved earlier on, to make this a priority early in their life. Part of this is we talk about obesity. Quite frankly, there's another aspect of this. There's a lot of individuals out there that may look fine. You look at them and they look great. But you know what? They're not exercising either. And so I think there's a mental health component of this that sometimes those that look fit take for granted. But from a mental health perspective, there is some type of linkage between the two. So whatever we can do to generate that conversation earlier, get more people talking about this. And I'd go back to the early education. I mean, the statistics are that we need to be having this conversation in kindergarten and elementary school, not in high school. In some cases, high school is too late. By the time we get them, we're doing the best we can. But when you look at the nature of our mission right now, sometimes we get individuals that commit to the Army a year out, okay? And that allows us to develop a fitness program and work for them over time. When you get a mission increase, like what just happened this past year, we really don't get that time. And so we call it kind of in and for. So we're trying to engender commitment, and then we're trying to get them to make that decision to come into the Army now because we need them now in order to meet an end strength requirement. So that provides additional pressure on recruiters. But yeah, I mean, like Malcolm said, I mean, listen, that's the $1 million question that we have here. But quite frankly, the fact that you're all here and we're having this conversation, I am an optimist. Let me just say this: I think you get this is truly a multifaceted problem. Okay, I mean, I think it's both a short, mid, and long term. And the short term, that's why I tend to emphasize a little bit more on the opportunities, vice what many of us believes is this existential threat. On the other aspect, and I'll just make this point now, I think the youth of today get a bad rap, and I want to be careful we don't go too far on this one here, because I will tell you, my experience, and I've had the good fortune of traveling across the country, is many of them want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They just didn't understand. All right, and they didn't get the proper advice and counsel and make good decisions. So in some cases, they've ruled themselves out, even though they would have liked to serve. But they want to be part of something that's bigger than themselves. They want to make a difference. Okay.
So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah.
But continue to beat the drum and raise the level of awareness in the education, as Jeff and Malcolm kind of highlighted. And this CrossFit and functional fitness is tied to what Malcolm highlighted, of where we're trying to zero in on those fitness programs tied to a particular specialty and requirement. I mean, there's nothing but positive goodness out of all this. Sorry.
Yeah, I think that my perspective addresses a lot of challenges, and I want to know what you think about it. I have to first say that I'm ex-Army Signal Corps. And I'm a Woodrow Wilson Fellow in Public Policy, International Affairs. And the way I've gotten to where I am, it was because of role models. I can tell you, I think many people have had someone who was in their life early on or at some point, and they shined a light on things for you, either directly or because of who they were, their achievements and that kind of thing. And for me, that was a mechanism. I think maybe that's what, in terms of Army recruiting, that's needed, that, some kind of structure system, put at different stages of young people's lives so they can see and interact with folks, because this is what has taken me from a rural upstate New York community to having worked for a couple presidents, obtained 2 master's degrees, been to 30 different countries. Role models, and they can impact a lot of different areas of what I'm hearing here. It can help. Sometimes people have to deal with these moral issues, and I think role models, for me, that's what really helped me. And as well, one of the issues I think that really is impacted if you have really good role models is like esprit de corps, which I think I feel I've been gone from the U.S. for almost 20 years, and I think that's what we've been missing coming back after being overseas in Europe and Africa, is that the esprit de corps, when I was in the 1970s, it's a different kind of thing. I had people like John Wayne, who made me want to be a better American, and the role models. I think we've lost a lot of role models, people who can sort of be a good example of how to be a good citizen. So I think role models are one way to address a lot of these issues. So I wonder what you thought about that.
Can I follow up the last couple of questions? Perfect, I think. The question I have is about what the recruit program is doing. I heard that you're suggesting your recruiters are actually working with folks before they sign in order to become ready and fit, maybe actually qualified physically to sign. Is that what's happening at this point?
Yeah. Yes.
It's a discussion. This discussion that I was involved with some 7 or 8 years ago. I'll shamelessly say I'm Tony Horton's cousin, P90X. Brought him to town about 8 years ago, and got him traveling around the world with Armed Forces Entertainment to do the workouts and to see just how deeply the functional fitness program had already gotten started mainly in the Air Force and in the Army. But I hear from this discussion exactly what this gentleman has just been talking about, and wondering whether there's a way, at not great expense, to inculcate some sort of mentor role in everybody you bring into the military service, and suggest that when they get out, even if it's 5 years later or 20 years later, that they have really a lifelong obligation to bring to the youth in particular the skills, the ethics, and the physical fitness aspect of it to the folks that might be the next soldiers, the next sailors, and all the rest. It could be something that might work closely with the Veterans Department, I suppose, and it wouldn't take. It's just a thought, basically, to plant and to maybe give them some ideas as to how to do it. And it's possible that some percentage of the folks that have gone through the service will end up doing that kind of work at a community level, not at a high level, but at a community level, and maybe helping the whole recruiting process. But certainly there are CrossFit folks, there are P90X folks that do very well. They work outside the line training and actually go beyond what is required. But those are kind of simple skills that are not necessarily expensive to sort of suggest to the youth, and might, on a mentor basis, help the recruiting system move forward. Is there a response to that, or
one of the things that we've developed, and it was really out of need because veteran unemployment rates were so high, is the Army's has a Soldier for Life program, and so our Soldier for Life program, though it isn't specific to mentor people, young youth for physical fitness, it's kind of a holistic approach that keeps us connected. Soldiers that depart the Army keeps them connected to the Army, whether it's helping to provide a catcher's mitt for them in communities, from an educational job employment standpoint or elsewhere, and trying to keep them in kind of the network. It's not specific, but there may be future aspects to this program where we try and operationalize, so to speak, soldiers who are no longer soldiers but are soldiers for life, because once a soldier, always a soldier. How do we kind of connect into that network and potentially exploit that or utilize that, as you're talking about? Right now, originally it was because we needed to assist soldiers, and that was helping us to connect with organizations and communities across America, the Army, and that's our Soldier for Life program. That may be a way for us to kind of start to network in and look at that. But you're talking a lot of people and a lot of resources, and so we just haven't probably got to the point where you're talking about. I don't disagree. Mentors and role models are incredibly important to all of us, and that have grown up, and I think it's hugely important. But I think, as was kind of stated here, I think. Heck, I mean, my PE teachers were role models, but guess what? We don't have PE anymore, from a fitness standpoint. So I think there's some institutional things that have to be changed, that will help us see those role models better.
Yeah, a lot of different role models of, as Malcolm just highlighted, PE teachers. A lot of our educational institutions don't have structured physical education periods anymore. But coaches, teachers, clergy, the fundamental family unit, mothers, fathers, grandparents, it is all part of that fundamental baseline of mentorship, of guidance, feedback, counseling, coach, teach, help, guide, all of those things that provide that role model at the next level to today. If I need some help, I got an issue. Is there somebody that I can call or talk to that I maybe not want to go to talk to mom and dad? And as Malcolm highlighted, the soldier for life in the Army. Same thing with our Marine brothers. Yeah. Once a Marine, always a Marine, and that is the fundamental ethos of the Corps. And so those things are powerful. We have gotten away from it. How do we, as a nation, integrate that seed corn as we develop the youth of America on the education side? And as I mentioned, early on in my opening remarks of those, 3 areas, one of them being, early childhood education and the education base of teachers, a huge factor for the youth of America, regardless of where they're coming from. What their background is.
I just want to add one quick comment. I think it's a wonderful question. I think when you start talking about role models or mentors, everyone in this panel is going to look at you and say we're in violent agreement, because none of us would be where we were unless we had those role models or mentors. Let me give you a slightly different slant on this, though. Unfortunately today, in some cases, the youth don't have that. Okay, to General Bignar's point, in some cases, we tend to think Napoleonic family. The reality is many of the youth are not growing up with that Napoleonic family. In some cases, they're exploring the military as an option because they know their current circumstances are not going to help them achieve their goals. Okay, so in some cases, they're coming into a recruiting center because they know they need to get away from where they're at right now. And one of the things that fulfills, my recruiters, and I only share this because they have shared it with me, is they begin to develop a rapport. And ultimately, they put the needs of that individual first. And in some cases, they're serving as that role model because that individual did not have it. And what fulfills them and what they've shared with me, in some cases, that starts a relationship that exists all the way through basic and AIT. And so for those recruiters, that makes them feel good because they're making a difference. I mean, that's ultimately what they're doing. They are changing that individual's life, whether they serve one term or a career. In many cases, what fulfills them is they say, had it not been for that opportunity, and many don't understand just how strong the emphasis on all of the services, but particularly in the Army, about education, and you reflected in your own comments, okay, the sense of camaraderie and the fact that you had the opportunity to travel the world and the educational commitment. I just got to tell you, many don't understand that, nor do they understand the commitment to leader development that we have. That I would argue is one of the reasons why I look at you now. You said 20 years ago. I'm going to tell you right now. I can tell right now you're fit into, you're a contributing member of society. And I think in part, I think it's because of those experiences that you had. So.
You know, we do have some, so the military, and I'm not trying to harp on this, but the junior ROTC program, I've watched it, you know, in schools. My high school has one now where it did not when I grew up. And watching those mentors, those non-commissioned officers or former non-commissioned officers and officers that have retired but are now investing back in their communities at the local level through discipline, fitness, they're becoming father figures. Sometimes they're becoming the parent for some. I've watched it. My old command sergeant major in Houston does this, and he has kids that he has turned their lives around because he has been a personal role model for them and has helped them, and they come to him for everything. And so that's a program. That's a way the military is trying to do that, you know, to get back into the schools and kind of inculcate that, you know, that fitness and discipline regimen, just to get them, you know, to get them straight and organized and help them on their life's path. It's not necessarily to recruit them. I mean, if they come in, great, but if they don't, they're better contributing members of society. And I think we do see that in various forms and fashions. We're trying to do that, but again, it is a much wider, much deeper problem set for our nation.
Yeah, well, it's got to be quick, though, because they're going to program in here, please.
First of all, good morning. I'm George Alexander, retired Major General.
What?
I agree with everything that is said. And let me just say, I think to one of the important aspects of this problem that we face is bringing our youth in at an early age. So I would say that you mentioned the number of military people that have served. What was it, 7% or 9% versus the 92 or 93%? What we need to do is educate the American people as to the benefits of serving in our military. And with that, hopefully families can then encourage their children at a younger age to become more involved, emphasize education, emphasize volunteering, emphasizing staying physically fit. All of these are important things. And to me, to find out that only 7% or 9% of our country has served, we as former military people, we have a responsibility to educate America about the benefits of serving and serving our nation. So I agree with everything that has been said. And I have one last question. Thank you, sir, for bringing up the junior ROTC, because that was my question. My question is, what is the total number of junior ROTC cadets in this country? Because that's where we, you know, could have an impact.
Yeah, I don't have the number. I don't have the answer to the number. So
unfortunately, that's a different command. That's
yeah. But but it's a great question. Yeah. No, so we enjoy great support, respect, and appreciation from the American people. However, what we don't have is an understanding of, connection to, and advocacy for what we do. And I agree with you. And we have to get out. And one of the ways we're trying to get after this is through centers of influence out there. I mean, whether it's a business leader, whether it's an educator, whether it's you in this room, whether it's a politician, a community leader. We have to educate those and get so that they have a better understanding and connection to us, because they will be, you know, apostles for it. You know, they will tell the story. And so, or the advocates, right? Excuse me, the advocates for us. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's tough though when you're, you know, we are working programs to do just that, but we're not where we need to be.
Can I just make one last comment? Then perhaps that's what us retirees need to do.
No, absolutely,
exactly what
you're exactly right.
To serve and to do what you're asking.
Absolutely, sir.
So George, you got to get to work.
Thank you,
General. That was a wonderful conclusion to a great panel. I'd ask you to thank our panelists. That concludes our program. It'll be posted on the web shortly, if not like right away. And so again, I thank you so much for coming out today for this important issue.
Off to the next mission.